Tonight we shall explore extraordinary journeys of life and the astonishing resilience behind a battle that commenced long before we could name our foe. You might envision white coats and triumphant breakthrough, yet throughout history, this struggle has waged in darkness, accompanied by desperate conjecture and whispered prayers. To truly experience, it is to confront an enemy unseen, unnamed, and unopposed. Before you settle in, do take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my content. Feel free to leave a comment below with your times own and local are witnessing the global audience. Joining in is always fascinating. Silence your notifications. Take a deep breath, and let us begin. Amidst millennia of silent dust, our tale does not open with a roar, but with whispers locked deep within the bones. Long before mankind invented words, long before doctors and laboratories came into being, this disease had already begun its silent work. A silent patient minus artisan was carving its mark into the very framework of life. Picture the desolate landscape of Wyoming, 53 million years ago. Here, paleontologists unearthed fossilized vertebrae of an early primate. Within this diminutive creature, Plissiadactylus, the ancient bone revealed signs of disease and abnormally proliferating, petrified massa tumor. Even at the dawn of mammals, the emperor had begun asserting its dominion. Yet the truly poignant evidence lies within our own bloodline. Follow me to a cave in South Africa, where in 2013, scientists studied fossilized foot bones of our human ancestors dating back 7 million years. The bones bore unmistakable marks of osteoseismara erosion. The aggressiveness of this bone cancer undeniable. This ancestor, traversing the wilderness, must have endured excruciating pain, swelling, and lameness, symptoms that set them apart from other creatures. They had no name for this affliction, nor any understanding of rebellious cells or genetic errors. It was simply pain, a curse, a darkness breeding within. Not a disease of civilization, not an industrial affliction, not a modern sin. It was the inherent fragility within complex multicellular life, perhaps the price of evolution. As we drift along the river of time to the banks of the Nile, arriving at the era of pharaohs and pyramids, the whisper grows clearer. The ancient Egyptians, meticulous recorders and masters of preservation, bequeathed to us not only golden masks and hieroglyphics, but also their very bodies. From the late 19th to the early 20th century, archaeologists, led by Sir Marcoland Leffy, a pioneer of ancient pathology, began unwrapping these mummified remains, not merely historical artifacts, but medical archives. Through early X-ray technology and meticulous dissection, they glimpsed bodies dormant for 3 millennia. Recurring scenes emerged: mummies entangled by pelvic tumors, female skulls from the Old Kingdom riddled with perforations characteristic of metastatic cancer, perhaps spreading from a primary site, likely the breast, the frozen remains of King Seti, unearthed from Siberian permafrosts, revealed a prostate mare preserved by the eternal ice condition that likely tormented him long before his elaborate burial. These silent witnesses illuminate pivotal historical fragments, attesting to the disease's ancient origins. Yet to trace humanity's earliest stricken and intellectual confrontation with this adversary, we must return to papier scrolls unearthed near Luxor in the 1862. This document, known as the Edwin Smith Papers, stands as a marvel. Though dated to approximately 1600 BC, it is believed to be a copy of a text predating it by roughly a millennium. Far from being a compendium of magic or oracular invocations, it stands as a clinical, rational surgical manual. Its author, displaying remarkably modern medical concepts, meticulously documented 48 cases categorized systematically from head to toe. Most entries provided diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment protocol. Arm fractures required splinting. Dislocated jaws demanded reduction. Yet in the 40-5th case, the text describes with startling clarity a tumor swelling the breast, The physician notes these growths feel cold to the touch, possess a hard texture, and spread beneath the skin. After completing his examination and diagnosis, he delivers what stands as one of medicine's most chilling yet honest pronouncements. He warns his peers this affliction is beyond cure. This was an admission of terminal illness, an acknowledgement of utter helplessness. 3,500 years ago, this unnamed Egyptian physician confronted cancer's visage. Recognizing its essence and invincible force, he recommended neither poultice nor incantation nor prayer. He recommended nothingness silence, profound and terrifying in its wisdom. For centuries, this remained the reality. Disease lurked like a spectre, an unnamed dread. It was not until a Greek physician, an influential figure from the island of Kos, that this enemy was finally named. Hippocrates, who lived in the 4th to 5th century BC, was nothing short of a revolutionary. He asserted that disease was not divine punishment, but a natural process, the result of internal imbalance. Observing the hard, invasive nature of tumors and the pattern of swollen veins radiating outward from the central mass, he was struck by a powerful visual metaphor. The scene resembled a crab burying its claws deep in the sand. Thus he named it kainos, the Greek word for crab. Later, the Roman encyclopedist Celsus translated this term into Latin. Thus was born the name we still use today, cancer, a simple name born of simple observation, yet one that precisely captures the disease's stubborn, spreading, unyielding nature. This name has echoed for the subsequent 2.5 millennia, witnessing confusion, despair, and ultimately evolving into a tenacious struggle against the despair. Once named, the enemy became a theor's-able, comprehensible concept. Yet the map drawn for this new territory proved tragically, bizarrely flawed. Hippocrates' shadow lingered long, but that of his successor eclipsed all like a solar eclipse. This man was Galen of Pergamon, a Greek physician practicing in the Roman Empire during the 2nd century AD. Galen was a man of extraordinary talent, yet profound arrogance, an indefatigable self-minus promoter and astonishingly prolific writer. With human dissection prohibited, his anatomical knowledge was almost entirely derived from the study of ape and pig carcasses. Yet his theoretical system proved so comprehensive and logically rigorous that it became the medical world's Bible. For the next 500 years, to question Galen was not merely to err, but to be deemed ignorant. Galen systemated Hippocrates' theory of the 4 humours, forging an unshakable dogma. He posited that the human body maintained a delicate equilibrium of 4 fundamental fluids: warm, moist blood cold, damp phlegm dry, hot yellow bile and the most enigmatic, melancholic black bile, the melancholic fluid, cold and dry in nature. It was associated with the earth, Vulcan, and the spleen. Health stemmed from the perfect equilibrium of these humours, while disease arose from imbalance. Galen asserted that cancer invariably resulted from an excess of black bile. This theory appeared exquisitely ingenious on the surface. It explained why cancer often manifested as dark, hard messes. When Galen had the rare opportunity to dissect tumours, what he observed was precisely congealed, black pathological matter. Was this not solidified black bile? This theory also accounted for the melancholic temperament observed in many cancer patients. Their sorrow and depression did not stem from the fatal disease itself, but from the humoral imbalance that caused the cancer. A melancholic disposition attracted melancholic humours. Everything fitted perfectly within this logical closed loop, forming an impenetrable cage of thought. Thus began the dark reign of black bile, the protracted 1-and-half millennium war against cancer was not a battle against cellular rebellion, but a misguided crusade against illusory humours. The entire strategy rested upon a flawed premise. Curing disease required purging harmful bodily fluids. The resulting therapies were both ineffective and cruel. Physicians prescribed potent purgatives, attempting to expel black bile through forced intestinal evacuation practiced bloodletting, incising veins to drain tainted humors alongside healthy blood, further exhausting already weakened patients, and imposed bizarre dietary prohibitions banning cabbage, beef, and certain legumes deemed black bile minus produced, while promoting foods supposedly capable of neutralizing it. Imagine a patient in medieval Paris or Renaissance Florence, their life being sapped by an invisible tumor. They were brought before the physician, this scholar educated at the finest universities, who had memorized every word of Galen's writing. The doctor solemnly nodded, diagnosed an excess of black bile, and launched his assault. The patient was bled, purged, and starved. A body already ravaged by cancer now endured a second, E2 assault, collateral damage from medical intervention. The tumor, undeterred, continued its rampage, indifferent to the fluid catastrophe afflicting other organs. As the patient grew weaker, the physician might intensify the treatment, convinced the melancholy stubbornness exceeded expectations. When the patient finally succumbed, none questioned the theory itself. Blame fell instead on delayed treatment or an irreparably profound humoral imbalance. This system appeared flawless, its very failure reinforced its internal logic. For 15 centuries, it remained medicine's pinnacle. Progress was not merely slow, it was virtually stagnant. Generation after generation of physicians devoted their lives to battling this imaginary foe, while the true enemy silently proliferated within the patient's body. Glimmers of dissent did occasionally appear. The great 13th century Islamic physician Al-Nafis questioned Galen's model of blood circulation in the 16th century. The Swiss physician Paracelsus went so far as to publicly burn Galen's work, advocating that disease stemmed from external pathogens rather than internal imbalances. Yet these voices remained isolated cries in the desert of dogma. The theory of black bile had become deeply entrenched, embedded within the entire Western medical system. It offered a flawed, yet reassuring explanation for a terrifying and seemingly chaotic disease. Abandoning this theory would have meant admitting that for over a millennium, the world's most learned sages had been utterly ignorant. Thus, the reign of black bile persisted a long, silent, and deadly slumber of thought. The crab clutched its claws tightly, yet the medical world's only response was to fight a phantom, until cracks appeared in the cage's walls. This did not stem from new disease theories, but from entirely novel methods of observation. The Renaissance was not merely a rebirth of art and literature, but the awakening of a singular curiosity, a yearning to examine the world as it truly was, rather than through the dogma of ancient texts. This spirit of empirical observation would ultimately topple Galen and his theory of black bile after 500 years of dominance. This revolution did not originate in physicians' study room, but was born upon the cold marble slabs of the Anatomy Theatre in Padua, Italy. Its leader was an ambitious and brilliant young Flemish anatomist, Andreas Vesalius, born in 1514. Vesalius was a child prodigy who became a professor at the University of Padua at the age of 23. Anatomical lectures of the era resembled bizarre theatrical performances, professors perched high on their lecterns reciting Galen's infallible classics, while humble barber surgeons below awkwardly dissected corpses, merely identifying organs as their names were recited. Vesalius found this deeply absurd. He cast aside the texts, descended from the podium, and took up the scalpel himself to explore. His discoveries astonished him. Human anatomy bore no resemblance to Galen's descriptions. The human jawbone was a single piece, not the 2-part structure of primates the human liver lacked. The 5-lobed configuration of canines, the human sternum comprised only 3 segments, not 7. Time and again, he found Galen's theories founded on animal dissections contained fundamental errors in human anatomical detail. In 1543, at the age of just 28, Vesalius published his magnum opus, De Human Ic Corporis Fabricae. This monumental work, accompanied by exquisitely detailed illustrations, presented the structure of the human body with unprecedented precision. It was a revolution in thought. Vesalius did not propose a new theory of cancer. That was not his aim. His contribution was far more fundamental. He shattered the sanctity of ancient authority, replacing it with the authority of directly verifiable observation. He proclaimed a new creed to the world: trust not books, but your own eyes. He charted the correct map of the human body, an essential starting point for understanding the mechanisms of disease. This map was crucial, yet it depicted only the state of health. The next critical step was to chart the geography of disease itself. This monumental task fell to the Italian physician Giovanni Battista Morgagni. This meticulous, patient, and insatiably curious scholar spent his entire career teaching at the University of Padua, where Vesalius had once lectured. Over 50 years, Morgagni meticulously documented patients' life trajectories and the progression of their ailments. As their attending physician, he was intimately acquainted with their symptoms, complaints, and suffering. Yet his work did not cease with the patient's demise. Having obtained permission from the family, he would perform an autopsy. In a sense, he became the ultimate diagnostician, linking the symptoms experienced in life with the pathological lesions discovered after death. In 1761, at the age of 79, Morgagni published the culmination of his life's work, anatomical investigations into the localization and causes of diseases discussed. Et cas is morborum per anatomicae indigat A. This monumental 5-volume work documented nearly 700 clinical cases. The publication represented a revolution in printing. It documented nearly 700 cases of patients suffering from chest pain and palpitations, was found post-mortem to have damaged atherotomous aorta. Another, paralyzed by epilepsy, had been afflicted by a brain tumor compressing vital structures. Time and again, he demonstrated the same fundamental truth. Disease was not an abstract, elusive imbalance of humors like black bile. It was a physical process with a specific location, existing in particular regions of specific organs. This represented a profound conceptual shift. Cancer was no longer an excessive accumulation of melancholic humors throughout the body, but a localized phenomenon. A lump in the breast, a growth in the stomach, a lesion in the lung. Morgagni detached cancer from the realm of abstract humoral theory, anchoring it firmly in the physical realities of human anatomy. His work transformed cancer from a philosophical conundrum into a mechanical problem. If cancer was a localized mechanical problem, perhaps a localized mechanical solution existed. This new understanding electrified the surgical profession. Surgeons, once regarded as mere craftsmen, butchers compared to the intellectual physicians, suddenly became the vanguard in the fight against cancer. If cancer was localized proliferation, a hostile invader occupying specific territory, why not simply excise it? The Scottish genius surgeon John Hunter, practicing in London at the close of the 18th century, became the most celebrated proponent of this radical new approach. Hunter theorized that cancer originates as a localized proliferation and, if detected early, can be completely excised. He argued that surgeons must abandon timidity, no longer content with draining abscesses or incising superficial tumors, and instead adopt bold, thorough methods. Extensive deep excision was essential, removing not only the tumor, but also a margin of surrounding healthy tissue to ensure no residual disease could regroup and strike back. This marked the dawn of tumor surgery. It was a brutal and terrifying era. Operations were performed without anesthesia, with patients pinned to the operating table, conscious as the scalpel cut. The dangers of bacteria were not yet recognized, and post-operative infections were rampant and often fatal. Mortality rates were staggering. Yet history recorded the first instances of partial cures. Women with small, Localized breast tumors who endured the excruciating pain of radical mastectomy gained a chance at survival. Their lives were purchased at the dreadful price of agony and disfigurement. Though crude, this strategy resembled a blunt miner's force assault. Yet it was grounded in tangible physiological reality, rather than mystical notions of bodily fluid imbalances. For the first time, humanity ceased to be passive victims of disease and began to mount a clumsy counterattack. Yet deeper enigmas persisted. What exactly did the surgeon's scalpel excise? What constituted the very substance of the human body? Morgana charted disease within it. Yet the ultimate origin and fundamental nature of the enemy remained utterly elusive. The answer lay not in the grand scale of organs and systems, but in a hidden world, a universe of astonishing complexity existing beyond the threshold of human vision. The key was a new tool, the microscope. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, lens grinders and amateur scientists like Antony van Leeuwenhoek used primitive microscopes to reveal a teeming world of microorganisms within a single drop of pond water. By the 19th century, these instruments had become sufficiently precise and powerful to probe deep into human tissue. In the 1832, German scientists Matthias Hess, C.H. Leiden and Theodor Schwann proposed a revolutionary new theory: all living things, whether animal or plant, are composed of minute fundamental units called cells. The human body was not a continuous tissue structure, but a community of trillions of independent cells, each possessing its own distinct life and function. It was against this backdrop the last great pathologist of the age emerged. His name was Rudolf Virchow, a titan of 19th-century German medicine. This scholar, who combined the roles of physician, anthropologist, and politician, thrived amidst Berlin's bustling industrial landscape. Armed with cutting minus-edge microscopes and fiery logic, Virchow elevated cell theory to new heights. He proclaimed a truth that would alter the course of biological history with the Latin max omnis cellula is cellulum. Every cell originates from a prime-inus existing cell. Cells did not spontaneously generate from primordial slime or formless humus, nor did they multiply through division as Hunt and others believed. Life begets life. Subsequently, Virchow turned his microscope upon cancerous tissue, where others perceived chaos. He discerned the distortion of normal processes. He observed cells, what disorganized, yet undeniably present. If the principle that all things originate from cells held true, these cancerous cells must have emerged from the organism's own healthy cells. This discovery was startling, terrifying, profound, and intimately personal. Cancer was not an alien invader. It was not a deposit of black bile, nor a parasite of foreign growth. It was us, a rebellion from within. A faction of the body's cellular society had broken the rules, reneging on the ancient pact governing growth and cooperation. These are our own cells, our own flesh and blood, now turning against us. They proliferate without limit, establishing a chaotic, anarchic state within the legitimate realm of the body, constructing a malignant empire. Virchow described cancer as cellular anarchy. With this insight, he finally and completely overturned the theory of black bile, pinpointing the true enemy. Through the microscope, he glimpsed its true visage. The war against cancer could now really commence. After millennia of battling phantom, humanity had finally recognized its real adversary. Within 19th-century operating theaters, a frenzy of desperate sawing unfolded. Before the dawn of silence, the air was thick with animalistic screams of terror. Awake patients were held down as surgeons' blades sliced through bone, their screams echoing through tiered lecture halls where students watched with expressions of horror and fascination. The finest surgeons were not gentle, but swift. Speed was the only mercy, racing against shock and blood loss. A 30-second amputation marked the hand of a master. In this brutal contest, cancer proved the most savage adversary. It grew like a foreign body, demanding total eradication. Yet the excision itself often became the surgeon's own death. Sentenced patients might survive the blade, only to succumb days later to an invisible foe, hospital Pseudomonas aeruginosa, an infection seeping into wounds that turned flesh into putrid sludge. This war against disease was doomed to failure, for the battlefield itself was contaminated, until that autumn morning in 1846, when a turning point arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Dentist William T. De Mortenay, and of questionable character, yet extraordinary talented, ministered sulfur-based anesthesia to a patient. Surgeon John Collins Warren then bent over and excised the tumor from the patient's neck. The patient neither screamed nor struggled. After the procedure, Warren turned to the astonished audience and uttered those famously humble words, "Gentlemen, this is no illusion." Anesthesia was born. The first shackle was broken. Surgeons were no longer sprinters but could become craftsmen. They had been gifted time, yet time alone was far from sufficient. The wounded still perished, and post-operative wounds still festered and rotted. The second liberation came from the rain-miners drenched wards of Glasgow, Scotland. A Quaker surgeon named Joseph Lister, gazing upon the foul stench of the operating theatre, read the works of the French chemist Louis Pasteur. Pasteur had demonstrated that fermentation and putrefaction were not spontaneous occurrences, but caused by microscopic organisms. Lister drew inspiration from this. He deduced that these invisible pathogens caused fatal infections. Thus began his experiments, using phenol, a potent alkaline chemical employed in sewage treatment. He sprayed it into the operating theatre air, onto surgical instruments, and even directly onto wounds. The results were nothing short of miraculous. With ward mortality rates plummeting, the war for cleanliness, the art of disinfection, had commenced. With the twin pillars of anesthetic silence and disinfectant safety established, the stage was set for a new breed of surgical warriors. Surgeons could now operate with boldness, methodical precision, and unapologetic aggression. William Stewart Holter, the quintessential embodiment of this new surgical era, possessed an unparalleled obsession. At the newly established Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Holter was a formidable enigma. This aristocrat of surgery demanded near-minus obsessive precision, insisting on absolute silence and rigor in the operating theatre. He pioneered the use of rubber gloves initially to protect the hands of scrub nurse Caroline Hampton, who later became his wife, from corrosive disinfectants. He was an outstanding innovator, an unparalleled technical master, and a demanding mentor who cultivated America's foremost cohort of surgeons. Yet for most of his adult life, he was mired in addiction to cocaine and morphine. The secret was buried deep within him, with the same unyielding control he exercised at the scalpel. His addiction, stemming from self-minus experimentation with cocaine as a local anesthetic, may well have fueled his near-minus obsessive dedication and extraordinary focus, while also forging his detached, clinical approach to medicine. When Halstead examined breast cancer, he perceived it as an engineering conundrum. Prevailing theory posited that cancer spread centripetal like a stain permeating fabric, following continuous pathways from the primary to meritwood. It infiltrated deep pectoral muscles from breast tissue before advancing along lymph node chains toward the armpit. To Halstead, the solution thus appeared logically inevitable, yet chillingly absolute. Removing only the lump was futile, like cutting the tops of weeds while leaving the roots intact. The entire system, every possible pathway for the disease to spread, must be eradicated in one operation. He termed it the definitive block resection. Posterity would call it the radical mastectomy. This operation was a masterpiece of anatomical violence. Halstead's procedure excised all tissue. The entire breast vanished. The pectoralis major and minor muscles were stripped back to the rib cage, and every lymph, node chain and fatty tissue in the armpit was meticulously dissected. It was a meticulous yet bloody dissection, its goal the complete eradication of any cancer cells that might recur. The outcome was profound disfigurement. Patients were left with hollowed minus-out chests, permanent arm swelling due to lost lymphatic drainage, and lifelong chronic pain, yet in an era offering no alternatives. This was hailed as a heroic, life-saving feat. Halstead's reported recurrence rates were astonishingly low for the time, showcasing his masterful skill. He had declared war on tumors, waging a total physical campaign, a war taken to its extreme. This surgeon wielding Ephraim a lancet was like a commander, his scalpel the ultimate weapon. The operating theatre became a battlefield, where victory was measured by the width of surgical margins and the volume of excised tissue. For decades, the Halstead radical procedure was not merely a surgical technique, but the very epitome of surgery. It was the gold standard, embodying surgical audacity and proclaiming this conviction with sufficient courage and a sufficiently sharp blade. This stubborn affliction could be utterly eradicated from the human body, leaving patients scarred yet alive. The era of radical surgery was one of heroic excision. It was an age when only deep incisions could bring hope. Yet even with the scalpel's newly acquired power, its reach proved ultimately limited. Even the most thorough, meticulously executed Halstead procedure often ended in defeat. Cancer cells would return, not at the scar's edge, but within the lungs, liver, or bones, like spectres repairing in the depths of a house thought cleared of hauntings. This profound and unsettling revelation suggested flaws in the Halstead theory, the very foundation of this radical war. Cancer was not always a localized stain, like a die spreading. Sometimes it resembled dandelion seeds carried by blood or lymph, drifting far and taking root in foreign soil. Surgeons were waging a war against an airborne enemy. The scalpel could not reach these microscopic fugitives, nor excise the disease that had become systemic. The war against cancer required new weapons, forces capable of operating across different dimensions, reaching realms beyond the scalpel's reach. As the 19th century faded and the 20th quietly dawned, this new weapon did not emerge from the operating theatre, but from the faint glow of a physicist's laboratory. Like many groundbreaking discoveries, it began by chance. In late autumn 1895, the reclusive physicist Wilhelm Conrad Eckert experimented with Kruger's tube, glass vessels capable of conducting electricity, in his dim laboratory in Würzburg, Germany. Shielding the tube with black cardboard to block visible light, he noticed a faint, ghostly green glow drifting near his workbench. A screen coated with barium platinocyanide was emitting an extraordinary glow. Some form of energy was being released from the tube, penetrating the blackboard, traversing the air, and striking the screen. It was an invisible energy. Placing his hand between the tube and the screen, he saw the faint outline of his skeletal structure appear on the surface, a startling sight. He dubbed it the X-ray X for the unknown. For weeks before announcing his discovery, he worked in secret, utterly absorbed, living unsleeping in the laboratory. The news spread across the globe at telegraphic speed. Within a year, X-rays were being used in hospitals to detect bullets and set broken bones, and in shoe shops as a novelty for trying on new footwear. They caused a sensation, like a magical light piercing flesh and blood. But soon another phenomenon was noted. Operators handling crude, unshielded X-ray tubes developed strange burns on their hands, reddened, blistered skin, peeling, even hair loss. In Chicago, young medical student Emil Gruber suffered severe burns while constructing an X-ray tube. This prompted him to ponder, could this destructive force be harnessed for good? If the rays could scorch healthy skin, might they not erase cancer cells? In early 1896, a surgeon brought a patient with recurrent breast cancer to Gruber, who agreed to attempt treatment. For nearly an hour, he continuously irradiated the tumor with rays invisible to the naked eye. This marked humanity's first attempt at radiotherapy. While the world marveled at Rontgen's rays, a more mysterious discovery unfolded quietly within a depth. Chilly shed in Paris. Polish scientist Marie Curie and her French husband Pierre were studying radiation phenomena, a term she herself coined. Their research revealed that pitch-blended type of uranium or exhibited radioactivity far exceeding what could be explained by its uranium content alone, leading them to deduce the presence of a more potent element within. The scientific quest that followed became legendary. In their draughty, makeshift workshop, they spent for years processing tons of pitch-blende ore, using enormous cauldrons for smelting. They stirred the molten mass with iron rods, gradually separating the mysterious substance with extraordinary patience. First, they discovered an element named after Marie's homeland, Poland radium. In 1898, they isolated a second, more potent element, one that emitted a faint blue glow in darkness, while continuously releasing invisible torrents of energy. They named it radium. Radium possessed an almost supernatural quality, like a miniature, self-sustaining engine. It defied known physical laws as an eternal energy source, its biological effect proving even more potent than X-rays. Pierre Curie deliberately burned his arm with samples to study its effects. Physicians soon recognized this potent, portable radiation source as a formidable weapon against cancer. They developed brachytherapy, a technique implanting tiny glass or platinum needles filled with radium salts directly into tumors, delivering concentrated destructive energy precisely at the heart of cancer cells. For superficial cancers like skin and cervical tumors, this technique represented a revolutionary breakthrough, shrinking or even eradicating growths without incisions. It seemed like a new kind of magic. Surgeons' wars were physical contests, battles between anatomy and steel blades. This, however, was a war of physics, a confrontation between invisible particles and silent waves. It marked the first major triumph for an surgical treatment. Yet this new power proved a dangerous ally. Early pioneers of radiology, driven by urgency and excitement, scarcely considered its long-term hazards. They handled radium with bare hands, carrying it in coat pockets. X-ray technicians tested tubes by placing their hand bones under the rays for observation. Daily ingestion of poison. They charted a new continent, unaware the Earth itself had become poisoned. Marie Curie's notebooks remain lethal to this day, requiring storage in lead boxes. She herself ultimately died of radiation anemia, her bone marrow utterly destroyed by a lifetime of exposure. Many early radiologists perished from the very cancers they sought to cure. These pioneers of the atomic age became its first martyrs, sacrificing their lives for the strange luminous elements they had unleashed upon the world. Yet their sacrifice opened a second front in the war against cancer where solid, palpable tumors can now be addressed by surgery, while localized or inoperable cancers are met with radiotherapy. Mankind possessed two weapons, yet both were confined to localized combat. Like cannons within a fortress, they proved formidable against enemies at the gate. Yet helpless once foes had infiltrated the heartland and spread throughout the kingdom. Metastatic cancer, this disease that disseminates throughout the body, remained an unsolved enigma. To combat it, medicine requires an entirely different weapon. It needs a systemic drug, a toxin capable of tracking and eliminating cancer cells wherever they lurk, whether deep within bone marrow or within the soft tissues of the brain. The world needed a lethal chemical, and the inspiration for this substance came, astonishingly, from the most brutal, industrialized killing fields in human history. The first clue emerged in 1915, within the foul-smelling yellow-green toxic cloud, drifting over the trenches of the Pires sector in Belgium. The use of poison gas in the First World War marked the opening of a terrifying new chapter in human conflict. Chlorine, phosgene, and most infamously, mustard gas, were designed not merely to kill, but to maim, instill terror, and transform battlefields into living hills. Mustard gas, this oily liquid with its faint scent of garlic or horseradish, proved particularly insidious. A blistering agent. It seared skin, blinded eyes, and ravaged lungs, leaving no soldier who encountered it unscathed. Yet, during autopsies on victims, pathologists uncovered deeper lesions, peculiar and distinct internal injuries. The soldier's bone marrow, the factory of blood production, had it refeed and dried up, while their lymph nodes had wasted away. This poison gas seemed to have a particular predilection for the rapidly dividing cells of the hematopoietic and lymphatic systems. This chilling discovery was recorded in medical journals, yet gradually faded into obscurity as the world sought to consign the horrors of the First World War to memory. This clue lay dormant for 2 decades until the world prepared for war once more. In the late 1930s, as the specter of another global conflict loomed, the American government quietly initiated a chemical warfare response program. They commissioned Yale pharmacologists Louis Goodman and Alfred Gilman to study a family of chemical compounds known as mustard agents. The official mandate was to develop antidotes or treatments. To achieve this, they first needed to precisely decipher the agents' cellular mechanisms of action. They selected a more stable, potent variant nitrogen mustard for their research. In animal experiments, they verified with chilling precision the observations made during the First World War. Nitrogen mustard was a devastating sticoxin, particularly potent against rapidly dividing cells, capable of utterly annihilating white blood cells. Amid the quiet of the Yale laboratory, Goodman and Gilman made a bold leap of thought, gazing upon this lethal weapon of war, the chemical agent engineered for mass destruction. They glimpsed another meaning. Was cancer not fundamentally a disease of uncontrolled cell division? Was lymphoma not cancer of the lymphatic system, a rebellion of white blood cells? They wondered, what if this chemical assassin could be harnessed? What if this toxin, selectively targeting rapidly dividing white blood cells, could be repurposed? What if it no longer targeted soldiers in trenches, but instead locked onto tumors within a patient's body, deliberately poisoning the patient with a systemic toxin to achieve more thorough destruction of cancer cells? This therapeutic concept was revolutionary, almost unimaginable. In 1942, an opportunity to test the theory arose. New Haven Hospital admitted a 48-year-old silversmith, referred to only as JD in medical records. He suffered from advanced lymphoma, with tumors like behemoths compressing his windpipe, obstructing veins, and spreading throughout his body. The only available treatment at the time, radiotherapy, had failed him, leaving him with no viable options. Without the patient's consent, Goodman and Gilman, collaborating with Surgeon Gustav Flinsgate, initiated their first trial of what they termed chemotherapy. The nitrogen mustard agent, classified as top-secret, was referred to only by its code name, Substance X. On 27 August 1942, they commenced intravenous treatment. The results were astonishing. Within days, JD's tumors began softening and shrinking, and he regained the ability to eat. He could lie flat to sleep. The cancerous tissue that had nearly claimed his life seemed to dissolve under the silent, systematic assault of the chemical agents. This remission, though miraculous, proved fleeting. The poison eradicated the cancer cells, but also destroyed JD's healthy bone marrow. His blood cell counts plummeted. Treatment had to be halted, and without the chemical pressure to contain it, the stubborn cancer returned. JD passed away less than 100 days after treatment commenced. Yet, during that brief, miraculous remission, he had proven the principal intravenous chemical agents could combat systemic cancer. They were proof of concept. The research involved wartime secrets. The findings were classified as top secret and remained undisclosed for years. The world would witness a second, more public and far more brutal demonstration of nitrogen mustard's power. 1 year later, on a December night in 1943, The Allied miners controlled port of Bari, on Italy's Adriatic coast, teemed with ships. As a bustling logistical hub, its defenses were thinly stretched. That night, over 100 German bombers launched a surprise attack, achieving complete surprise. This devastating assault became known as the Little Pearl Harbor. Over 20 vessels were sunk, claiming the lives of hundreds of sailors. Among the stricken ships was the American Liberty freighter John Harvey. This vessel carried top-minus secret cargo 2,000 M47A1 bombs, each containing 100 pounds of mustard gas, specifically stockpiled to counter German chemical warfare. Following the explosions, the toxic cloud formed by mustard gas mixing with fuel oil, leaking from burning vessels, drifted into the harbor and spread into the city. Hundreds of sailors were rescued from the oil miners' contaminated waters. Their initial injuries appeared to be caused by blast, shock and burns. Yet within days, a medical enigma emerged the survivors began dying. Their deaths not attributable to visible trauma. They succumbed to a profound and inexplicable depletion of white blood cells. The Allied command, desperate to conceal the existence of chemical weapons from both the enemy and the public, panicked. They dispatched chemical weapons expert Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Alexander to investigate. Alexander, familiar with Yale's classified research, swiftly identified the characteristic symptoms of mustard gas poisoning. His meticulous autopsies confirmed the conclusion. The sailors had perished from bone marrow suppression, their immune defenses utterly destroyed. Though the Bari port tragedy was a human catastrophe, Alexander's classified report provided the first large-scale human data on the systemic effects of nitrogen mustard. This report offered brutal, irrefutable public evidence, corroborating the phenomena observed by Goodman and Gilman in individual patients. Thus, humanity's most savage impulse for destruction, the desire to poison one another on an industrial scale, paradoxically gave birth to the third major weapon in the war against cancer. Chemotherapy was forged in the crucible of World War. This paradoxical drug emerged from the transformation of a weapon of death into an instrument of healing. It filled the final gap in the primitive triad of treatments, now comprising surgery, physical removal of tumors, radiotherapy, focused energy to destroy lesions, and chemotherapy, systemic poisoning of the disease. Therapeutic strategies grew increasingly complex, the arsenal ever more diverse. The war was far from over, yet humanity now fought the king of all melodies simultaneously on every front. The long, slow, and often painful process of transforming crude poison into precise science was about to begin. In the mid-1942, the sterile corridors of Boston Children's Hospital exuded an order of fate. Here, a diagnosis of childhood acute lymphoblast leukemia was not a challenge to be conquered, but a time frame to be managed. The death sentence was not delivered with the clang of a hammer, but in the quiet scratch of a pen on a prescription pad. The disease raged through the blood like wildfire, spreading at terrifying speed. A child might present with fever, a limp, or widespread bruising, only to depart forever within weeks, sometimes mere days. Treatment options were limited to palliative care, alleviating suffering. Transfusing blood to replace healthy cells squeezed out by cancerous white blood cells. It resembled a planned retreat, striving to make the end as gentle as possible. The word cure was never uttered, nor was resistance even mentioned. It was into this realm of tacit resignation that pathologist Sidney Farber stepped. Pathologists are physicians for the deceased. His world comprised microscopes, lights, autopsy and the cold, unyielding confirmation of disease's ultimate triumph. A meticulous, somewhat austere man, he found greater comfort in the cells beneath glass than in the chaotic, ever-changing living patients. Yet what he witnessed unsettled him profoundly. As he performed autopsies on these young children, documenting how leukemia mercilessly ravaged every organ and tissue, He grew unable to tolerate his clinical colleagues' somber fatalism. He refused to accept this as nature's absolute law. It was merely a problem without a solution. He resolved to cross the threshold between life and death, stepping from the realm of the departed into that of the dying, hoping to guide them back among the living. Though not a chemist, Faber voraciously studied medical literature, becoming obsessed with the fundamental mechanisms of cell growth. He understood that both healthy and cancerous cells required specific nutrients for division. Chief among these was folic acid, a B vitamin crucial for DNA synthesis. Without folic acid, cellular replication ceases entirely. His attention was drawn to the work of British researcher Lucy Wells, who discovered that crude yeast extract, rich in folic acid, could cure a specific type of anemia in pregnant women. Subsequently, he learned of findings from New York researchers supplementing pediatric leukemia patients with folic acid accelerated the deterioration of their condition at an alarming rate. Cancer cells, already proliferating wildly, voraciously consumed folic acid, causing malignant cells to multiply explosively and hastening the children's demise. This discovery was both terrifying and tragic. Yet within the quiet of Faber's laboratory, a peculiar and ingenious concept began to take shape. It rested upon a starkly logical premise: if a substance could defeat cancer, what effect might a substance that blocked that very substance produce? Antifolate, a counterfeit molecule structurally similar enough to fool cellular mechanisms, yet sufficiently different to jam the gears of DNA replication. It was a revolutionary concept. At the time, the only effective treatments for cancer were crude instruments, the surgeon's scalpel and radiation. Both were localized therapies targeting tangible, palpable tumors. Leukemia was different. It was a liquid cancer, a systemic disease circulating throughout the body. It could not be excised surgically, nor could an entire child's body be subjected to total body irradiation. A systemic disease demanded a systemic weapon, a toxin that could travel through the bloodstream. Faber contacted chemist P. Subaru at the Lyle laboratory. Subaru's team had recently synthesized precisely the type of molecule Faber envisioned. One such compound, aminopurin, proved to be a potent antifolate agent. By 1947, Faber was poised to proceed. He established an isolation ward within the hospital, a necessity, given the controversy surrounding this experimental therapy, which ran counter to the prevailing practice of offering only palliative care. He gathered several children deemed terminal, with mere weeks to live. They had nothing left to lose. Once the injections began, the initial results were harrowing. Aminopurin behaved like a potent poison. Undoubtedly, it attacked not only leukemia cells but destroyed all rapidly dividing cells in the body. The children developed mouth ulcers so severe they could not eat. Their hair fell out completely, and their bone marrow, the factory producing blood cells, was suppressed to dangerously low levels. Some colleagues were appalled. He's a pathologist, they murmured. Yet he tortures children with toxic chemicals based on half-bait theories. Yet Faber remained unflinching. He adjusted dosages, managed side effects, and most crucially, maintained relentless blood monitoring. Day after day, he drew samples, stained slides, and counted cells under the microscope, counting the enemy. Then the miracle arrived. The number of leukemic blasts in Robert Endler's blood began to fall. Not marginally, but precipitously. The boy's fever subsided. The bruises on his skin gradually faded, and vitality returned. Faber performed a bone marrow biopsy, inserting a thick needle into the boy's hip to extract the spongy, blood-producing tissue. Under the microscope, areas once densely packed with malignant cells now showed small patches of normal bone marrow tissue beginning to regenerate. This was remission, a startling, almost unbelievable temporary remission. Another child in the ward had responded. Of the first 16 children treated with a methotrexate, 10 experienced dramatic albeit temporary improvement. This was not a cure leukemia, approved to cunning, invariably finding pathways to resistance. Remission lasted mere months or a year at most, after which the disease inevitably returned. The drugs now ineffective, all the children ultimately succumbed to the disease. Yet Farber's achievement was epic minus making. He established the principles of treatment, demonstrating for the first time that chemical agents could systematically combat systemic cancer. He opened a door sealed for millennia, thus chemotherapy was born. Like the atomic bomb's successful testing, the true battle now commenced. Farber understood this profoundly. He knew the faint, fragile Victorian Boston hospitals' wards marked not an endpoint, but the beginning of the journey. Transforming these fleeting remissions into lasting cures demanded a wholly different battle. The theatre of war extended beyond hospital beds and laboratories into the corridors of power. It required funding, resources, and an unprecedented national will. The quiet, meticulous pathologist, who had once cherished his glass slides, thus embarked upon a second life. He transformed into a warrior. He treasured letters from parents of children he had cured even in the face of ultimate grief. These expressions of gratitude were locked away in a filing cabinet he called his emotional safe. He prepared to take this fight to a wider stage. He would go to Washington. The America Faber sought to mobilize was a nation brimming with a particular post-war technological confidence. This was a nation that had successfully split the atom, built an interstate highway network, and was now earnestly planning a manned lunar mission. The prevailing belief was that any challenge, no matter how complex, could ultimately be overcome with sufficient intelligence, resources, and sheer American will. Yet cancer remained a spectre, spoken of in hushed tones, viewed as a private shame rather than a public enemy. It was the forbidden word. Sidney Farber understood that to secure the necessary resources, the language itself must change. He sought to transform cancer from a silently creeping terror into an imminent threat the entire nation could unite against. He was not alone in this new war. His most crucial ally was a woman named Mary-Louise Ho, a figure of astonishing energy and influence. A New York socialite and art collector, Mary was a powerhouse in designer suits, yet her passion stemmed from personal tragedy, having witnessed her advertising magnate husband, Albert Lasker, succumb to colon cancer. She raged against the primitive state of medical research and meagre government funding. She embraced medical salvation with almost religious fervor. Together with Faber, she forged one of the most influential lobbying partnerships in American history. Faber was the scientific authority, a solemn physician who could articulate the essence of disease with unquestionable expertise. She was the political strategist, adept at defining issues, building coalitions, and making the decisive phone calls. Their strategy stands as a masterclass in shifting public perception. They launched an unrelenting campaign to drag cancer out of the shadows. They courted media allies, feeding journalists stories about promising new research and the desperate need for funding, crafting brochures and advertisements. A famous national newspaper had featured a sinister hand emerging from the word cancer, boldly captioned, "Mr. Nixon, can you cure cancer?" It was a direct and audacious challenge. They framed the fight against cancer as a war one America had yet to commit to seriously, but must win rather than a slow, incremental scientific process. The first major achievement was establishing the Jimmy Fund. In 1948, Farber collaborated with the New England Entertainment Club, an organization of entertainers, to organize a radio telethon. They found a young patient at the hospital named on Gustav Sinead. I heard Boston Braves been given the pseudonym Jimmy to protect his privacy. During the live broadcast, several Braves players visited Jimmy in his hospital bed. The broadcast caused a sensation, and donations poured in. The Jimmy Fund thus became a beloved Boston institution, providing Faber with sustained private funding to establish his research center, later renamed the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. More significantly, that human is at the disease, giving it a child's face, and inspired millions to embrace the fight against cancer as a personal mission. With this public support as their foundation, Faber and ALK has set their sights on grander ambitions. The federal government, they pointed out that the National Institutes of Health and its smaller National Cancer Institute had long suffered from underfunding and bureaucratic constraints. They demanded the launch of a project comparable to the Manhattan Project or the Apollo program, a centrally coordinated, comprehensive campaign to conquer cancer. They found allies in Congress, including Alabama Senator Lester Hill and Rhode Island Representative John Fogerty. Year after year, Mariel Rusk marched on Washington armed with charts, data, and heart-wrenching case studies, persuading lawmakers to allocate supplementary funds to the NIH budget, often far exceeding the agency's own requests. By the late 1960s, the political climate presented a golden opportunity for their grand vision. The Vietnam War was increasingly unpopular, mired in a technological quagmire. Following the 1916 moon landing, America sought new grand challenges, a fresh project for national cohesion. Faber and Alaska seized the moment, proposing an independent federal agency dedicated solely to conquering cancer. This agency would possess unlimited funding authority and report directly to the president. The proposal sparked fierce debate within the scientific community. Many researchers harbored reservations about a top-down, mission-driven model, fearing it would stifle the fundamental curiosity, driven science that oft unyielded major breakthroughs. They favored the existing peer-review system of the National Institutes of Health. Yet the political momentum proved unstoppable, and public enthusiasm was ignited. A committee of eminent figures issued a report calling for a comprehensive offensive with a cure target, the United States bicentennial in 1976. President Richard Nixon, within the White House, sensed a political opportunity. He was seeking a popular domestic initiative to divert attention from the ongoing turmoil of the Vietnam War. This war on cancer was perfect, boldly optimistic, yet politically untouchable. Who could oppose curing cancer? On 23 December 1971, at a ceremony in the state dining room of the White House, Nixon signed a National Cancer Act in the presence of members of Congress, senators, and an emotional Mary Lasker. This landmark legislation, while falling short of Lasker's original vision for an independent agency, significantly expanded the authority and budget of the National Cancer Institute. The director of the National Cancer Institute would be appointed by the president and report directly to the White House. The funding allocated was astronomical. The act authorized $1.6 billion for the first 3 years, equivalent to over $10 billion today. The agency's budget quadrupled almost overnight, with funds flooding into cancer research centers nationwide. New buildings sprang up, and thousands of researchers emerged. Cancer research thus transformed from a limited, cottage-industry-scale endeavor into a vast national undertaking. A wave of optimism swept the nation. The war on cancer had been formally declared. The commander-in-chief had mobilized national resources scientists to gain warriors. Laboratories became frontline positions. Victory seemed not merely within reach, but inevitable. Yet a subtle, complex problem quietly emerged. America had effectively declared total war on an enemy whose very nature it did not yet comprehend. It mobilized a vast army to confront a shadow, an unknown entity, not lurking in foreign lands, but concealed within the high walls of its own cities, within the very bodies of the citizens it sought to protect. While this newly funded war poured billions into developing and refining chemotherapy regimens and radiation techniques, a deeper, more fundamental revolution was brewing in the realm of basic science. That troubling question remained unanswered: what exactly is cancer? What trigger mechanism transforms normal cells into malignant, endlessly dividing monsters for decades? Viruses remained the prime suspect. This notion races back to 1911, originating with Peyton at the Rockefeller Institute. Ress was investigating peculiar tumors in Plymouth Rock chickens. He discovered that grinding the tumors, filtering the resulting mass through a fine membrane that blocked all bacteria, and then injecting the cell-free fluid into healthy chickens caused them to develop identical cancers. The only microscopic substance capable of passing through the membrane was a virus. The discovery of Ress-sarcoma virus was significant, yet it was long regarded as a peculiar anomaly in avian biology. However, during the 1960s and 1970s, as more animal carcinogenic viruses were identified, the viral theory of cancer gained substantial traction. This concept held profound appeal. Cancer was fundamentally an infection where foreign invaders' viral particles hijack cellular mechanism, compelling malignant transformation. This model perfectly aligned with the metaphor of the war on cancer. The enemy was an external pathogen. The mission was to identify the virus and develop vaccines or antiviral drugs to eradicate it. With fresh funding from the National Cancer Act, virology laboratories across America embarked on the pursuit of human oncogenic viruses. Within the laboratories of the University of California, San Francisco, two young virologists, Harold Varmus and J. Michael Bishop, were immersed in the intricate details of this challenge. They were not clinicians. They were basic scientists, driven by a profound curiosity about the carcinogenic mechanisms of retroviruses. They focused their attention on the virus's progenitor, the sarcoma virus. They knew this virus contained a specific oncogene, which they named S, or phonetic S-aroma. Their objective was to uncover the operational mechanism of this viral gene, which required first locating it. Their approach was ingenious, a classic example of molecular biology. They planned to create a probe, a segment of radioactive DNA whose sequence perfectly mirrored the S or C gene, based on the rules of DNA base pairing A pairs with T, G pairs with C. This radioactive probe would bind only to its exact sequence counterpart. After washing the probe through DNA from infected chicken cells, it would precisely light up, marking the location where the viral oncogene had inserted into the chicken genome. This was akin to seeing the invisible, a genetic positioning beacon. The experiment succeeded perfectly, pinpointing the enemy gene within the cell. Yet Bishop and Farmer were meticulous scientists, and outstanding scientists always establish control groups. They resolved to replicate the experiment this time, using DNA from normal, healthy, uninfected chickens. The logic was clear. Without viral presence, the probe should find no binding sites, yielding a blank result. They prepared DNA from healthy chicken cells, washed it with a radioactive BS-RC probe, and awaited the outcome. The subsequent discovery would rewrite biological history. The probe bound, emitting a bright, distinct fluorescence. The gene they had sought so diligently, the one regarded as the unique, lethal weapon of the invading virus, already existed. It lay dormant within the DNA of perfectly normal chickens. Stunned, they repeated the experiment. The outcome remained unchanged. They examined other animals, discovering variants of the S or C gene in the DNA of ducks, turkeys, quails, and even fish. Ultimately, they traced its presence within the human genome. This viral gene was not an alien invention, but a slightly modified replica, a stolen from normal cellular genes A sequence, nearly ubiquitous across all animal life. The implications of this discovery were staggering, sending shockwaves through the scientific community. Cancer, in most instances, was not an external invasion. It stemmed from an internal betrayal. These sequences, dubbed -oncogenes, were not inherently malevolent. Under normal conditions, they formed a vital component of the cell's command and control system, It was these genes that dictated when a cell should grow, divide, or differentiate, acting as the accelerator in the cellular car. Take the S or C gene, for instance. The protein it encodes is a vital regulator of cell growth. Viruses merely hijack this gene, incorporating it into their own genetic code and causing damage in the process. They tamper with the accelerator, leaving the cell perpetually primed for action. This revelation fundamentally reshaped humanity's understanding of cancer. The enemy was not an external force, but ourselves. Cancer cells were not alien invaders, but normal cells that had suffered specific internal genetic damage. Disease begins with a spelling error, mutations in these crucial protein-oncogenes that transform them into cancer-causing oncogenes. This is a disease triggered by dysfunction within our own DNA. Soon, researchers embracing this new paradigm identified the human A and K gene family, including genes such as AOZ, by C and HER by B. They also uncovered the other side of the equation. If oncogenes function like accelerators stuck in the open position, a braking mechanism must exist. The normal role of these tumor suppressor genes is to pause the cell division process to check for DNA damage and, when fatal defects are found, to trigger a suicide program known as apoptosis. The most famous of these, the p53 gene, was discovered years later and is often hailed as the guardian of the genome. When tumor suppressor genes mutate or are lost, this braking system fails. Cancer is thus no longer viewed as a single event, but as a progressive accumulation of errors. A cell must endure multiple DNA damages, require both the accelerator to fail and the brakes to malfunction, often accompanied by other systemic failures, before it can break free from normal constraints and become truly malignant. This explains why cancer is primarily an aging disease, accumulating sufficient random, unfortunate mutations within a single cell inherently requires time. The war on cancer, declared with such fanfare and optimistic conviction in 1971, suddenly faced an adversary far more complex and nuanced than imagined. The objective was no longer simply to identify a single virus for vaccine development or discover a miraculous chemical agent to eliminate the invader. How to eliminate this distorted replica of the self. How to attack cancer cells without harming the healthy cells from which they arose. The enemy in this war was not an external pathogen, but an internal conflict unfolding at the genetic level. When humanity realized the seeds of self-destruction were already woven into the very fabric of the genome, this profound and unsettling discovery overturned old assumptions, laying the theoretical groundwork for the next 50 years of the cancer struggle. The target was no longer a mysterious invader, but specific mutated genes, with the battlefield itself being the human genome. Thus, for a long time, this war was fought along a single front. It was a passive defensive campaign, a desperate counterattack launched only after the enemy had breached the gates and fortified itself within the body. The tactics were brutal and direct: locate the tumor, then excise, burn, or poison it. Scalpels, radiation beams, chemotherapy drugs, surgical instruments, radiant beams, and fusion tubes. Yet as the commanders of this war, surgeons and oncologists, honed their craft, a troubling realization began to permeate the medical community. They were winning local battles, occasionally even achieving victories, that they were failing to win the war. They were merely mopping up a battle long since lost, a defeat whose seeds had often been sown years, even decades, earlier. A new front was urgently needed. This war should not be fought defensively, but proactively, a war of prevention. The first major engagement on this new front would not be fought in operating theaters or laboratories, but in the smoke-filled cafes, offices, and living rooms of the mid-20th century. The enemy in this war was a phantom presence, a fleeting pleasure, a temptation so commonplace within daily customs that it remained utterly invisible. The target of this war was tobacco itself. By the 1950s, lung cancer had evolved from a medical curiosity into a terrifyingly common spectre. In post-war Britain's soot-stained cities, this plague lurked in plain sight. Doctors naturally noticed the surge in cases. They saw a steady stream of patients, predominantly men, though women were increasingly represented. These individuals coughed until breathless, grew emaciated, and bore X-rays riddled with shadows. They suspected the culprit might be industrial smog or the mounting exhaust fumes from motor vehicles, the tarmac beneath their very feet. In London, two researchers from the Medical Research Council, Richard Dulland Austin Bradford Hill, resolved to investigate. The young physician Holland Hill, a pioneer in medical statistics, were both meticulous scholars. They embarked on an investigation known as a case-control study, an elegant, almost common-sense detective work. They focused on patients with lung cancer in London hospitals. For each patient, they matched controls of the same age and gender who were hospitalized for other conditions. Then the questioning began. These persistent interviewers, clipboards in hand, moved between hospital beds, patiently recording details of hundreds of lives, place of residence, occupation. Did they cycle? Only finally, almost as an afterthought, would they ask, "Do you smoke?" The data accumulated, punched on two cards. As Hill and Dole sifted through the responses, a pattern emerged. The culprit was neither smog, nor tie wear, nor exhaust fumes. In fact, amid all the complex variables of modern life, one correlation roared from the data like a physical law: lung cancer patients all smoked, and in staggering quantities. Patients in the control group, however, were largely non-smokers. When they published their findings in the British Medical Journal in 1950, their conclusion was succinct, measured, yet earth-shattering. Smoking was the key factor in causing lung cancer. Across the Atlantic, in St. Louis, Missouri, young medical student renowned surgeon Izzy Graham reached precisely the same conclusion through parallel research. Graham, a heavy smoker himself, was initially deeply skeptical. He found it hard to believe that his daily indulgence in such a pleasurable habit could be so detrimental to health. Yet the research data was irrefutable. He unwindled carefully applied to distilled from cigarettes to the shaved backs of mice, which promptly developed tumors. This link was no longer merely statistical, it was biological. The evidence was forming an impregnable fortress. Yet the tobacco industry, entrenched like an empire, had long permeated the fabric of Western culture, symbolizing sophistication, masculinity, rebellion, and relaxation. Its power was vast, its resources seemingly limitless. It would not relinquish its territory lightly. The industry's countermeasure strategy was not to challenge the science directly. That would be tantamount to suicide. Instead, it adopted a more insidious, modern tactic: sowing doubt. In 1954, America's major tobacco companies jointly published the frank statement to smokers across over 400 U.S. newspapers. This public relations masterpiece assured the public that they took health concerns seriously, dismissed anti-smoking claims as alarmist, and pledged to fund independent research to conceal the truth entirely. They established the Research Council of the Tobacco Industry, an organization cloaked in scientific authority that funded all manner of research, yet deliberately avoided any connection between their products and cancer. They created a fog, allowing the truth to settle in murky waters. They promoted the smoker personality theory, implying smokers themselves possessed a genetic predisposition to cancer. They repeatedly emphasized that correlation does not imply causation. Whenever controversy intensified, they would deploy highly paid scientists to declare existing evidence inconclusive. This was a new kind of warfare, a battle for information and perception, targeting the human mind itself. The tobacco industry's advertising was masterful. Rugged cowboys, elegant film stars, and most intriguingly, the image of the doctor. In advertisements from the 1930 seconds and 1940 seconds, physicians in white coats frequently appeared, conveying reassurance to the public, while doctors choose camel. The slogan was direct and powerful. If health experts favored this product, how could it be harmful? Facing emerging scientific threats, the industry introduced filtered cigarettes, promising a safer, gentler smoking experience. This was a clever bluff using technology to address problems they publicly denied existed, providing anxious smokers with an excuse to continue. Meanwhile, evidence piled up like an insurmountable wall. Duran Hill recognized the need for more robust data, launching the British Doctors Study in 1951. This prospective study would track the future health of a specific cohort rather than review past history. Nearly 35,000 British male doctors were enrolled, their health and smoking habits monitored over the next 50 years, ultimately becoming one of the most significant epidemiological studies in history. The findings were chilling. The longer and heavier the doctor smoked, the higher their mortality risk. Deaths occurred not only from lung cancer, but also from numerous other diseases. Dr. V. Graham, a Street Lewis surgeon who helped establish this link, eventually quit his habit of 2 packs a day, but it was too late. In 1957, he was diagnosed with inoperable invasive lung cancer and passed away within months. This became the final tragic data point in his research. Public opinion began to shift slowly yet resolutely. The relentless accumulation of evidence could not be ignored indefinitely. In the United States, the 1964 report Smoking on Health, published by the U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory Committee, marked a turning point. Surgeon General Luther B. Tritton deliberately chose a Saturday morning for the report's release to minimize stock market impact, a detail revealing the sheer scale of economic forces he faced. Though the 387-page document was dry and technical, its conclusion delivered an earthquake. The U.S. government, with supreme authority, declared smoking a cause of lung cancer. This dealt a fatal blow to the campaign of doubt. The subsequent victory was not swift, but a protracted siege. In 1966, faint warning labels first appeared on cigarette packets. By 1971, television and radio and tobacco advertising, public smoking bans began spreading across cities and states, transforming smoking from an omnipresent social ritual into a clandestine habit confined to designated areas and wind-swept alleyways. This battle for prevention had won its first major engagement. It demonstrated that defeating an adversary need not always involve surgical intervention within the body's sometimes data, policy, education, and the slow, arduous yet ultimately world-changing power of repeating the truth until it becomes irrefutable could prove equally effective. The greatest victories are the cancers that never materialize. Yet while this public health campaign unfolds in government halls and newspaper columns, the private struggles of individual patients persist, often accompanied by devastating silence and isolation. Throughout history, cancer patients have remained passive protagonists in their own narrative. Diagnoses were delivered by omniscient physicians, often in hushed, paternalistic tones. Treatment plans were unilaterally decided rather than negotiated. The patient's role was one of compliance, endurance, and suffering. The disease itself was shrouded in shame, discussed only in euphemisms. The big illness, the lump, the lung illness. It was regarded as a private tragedy, a skeleton in the family closet. Obituaries never listed cancer as the cause of death. This silence functioned as a cage, isolating patients from one another and stripping them of agency. Yet in the latter half of the 20th century, the prisoners began to tear down the walls. A revolution was brewing, spearheaded by the patient community itself. Paradoxically, Its foundations were laid by influential figures outside this circle. In the post-war years, New York socialite and philanthropist Mary Liz Eyre rallied allies to declare war on cancer. This political strategist, acting as a master lobbyist, leveraged her wealth and connections to bend Washington to her will. She was convinced cancer could be conquered through concentrated government funding, much like the model that had built the atomic bomb. Her relentless campaigning culminated in Richard Nixon signing the 1971 National Cancer Act, a landmark legislation that substantially increased funding for the National Cancer Institute and established a nationwide network of cancer research centers. Alaska's war on cancer was a top-down endeavor led by scientists and politicians. Patient-led movements had yet to emerge, but this campaign injected urgency and resources into the field, creating the institutional framework that would soon become the focus of a new generation of activists. The true catalyst for the patient advocacy movement stemmed from a radically different disease. In the 1980s, the world faced the terrifying onslaught of the AIDS epidemic. An entire generation of young men, the majority gay, was being decimated by a mysterious and terrifying virus. The initial response from government and the medical establishment was heartbreaking, slow and riddled with prejudice. Against this backdrop, a fierce, intelligent, and desperate resistance movement emerged. Groups like ACT-UP, acting collectively to unleash power, refused to be silent victims. They took to the streets to fight. They staged deaths at minor sins on Wall Street, hung giant condoms over senators' residences, and infiltrated the headquarters of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, forcing the agency to shut down for a day. They were loud, disruptive, and remarkably effective. They taught themselves virology and pharmacology, mastering the jargon of clinical trials. They demanded a seat at the table with researchers and regulators, insisting that those whose lives hung in the balance had a right to participate in decision-making. They successfully pressured the FDA to create fast-track approval for life-saving drugs. The cancer community watched closely. They have witnessed the power of organized, informed, relentless campaigning, realizing that the traditional rules of compliance and silence can be broken. The first wave, perhaps the most potent of this new anti-cancer movement, originated within the breast cancer community. For decades, breast cancer remained a particularly silent disease, shackled by cultural taboos surrounding women's bodies. The standard treatment was the halsted radical mastectomy, a brutal, disfiguring procedure removing the entire breast, pectoral muscle, and lymph nodes, based on surgical dogma and question for nearly a century. Women often underwent surgery without knowing whether their breast could be preserved, signing consent forms granting surgeons absolute discretion. This represented the zenith of medical authoritarianism. By the 1980s and 1990s, women began challenging this status quo, initially forming support groups merely to share experiences and offer mutual solace. These collectives rapidly evolved into formidable political forces. Organizations like the National Coalition Against Breast Cancer, founded in 1991, adopted strategies from the AIDS movement, championing the principle of action, not pity. They rejected charity fairs and silent sympathy, demanding political power and effective cures. Led by figures like Fran Visco, a lawyer and breast cancer survivor, they marched on Washington, learning to lobby Congress not with dry statistics, but with the raw emotional power of personal testimony. They fought for and secured billions in new research funding. The pink ribbon evolved from a grassroots awareness symbol into a global phenomenon, becoming a potent emblem for the movement, though sometimes exploited commercially. This new breed of patient advocates fundamentally reshaped the landscape of cancer research and treatment. Their impact profound and tangible. First, they fundamentally altered the drug approval process, emulating ACT-UP's tactics. They stormed the doors of the FDA, demanding faster access to promising experimental drugs through compassionate use programs and accelerated approval pathways. They forcefully argued that for metastatic cancer patients, the theoretical long-term risks of unproven drugs pale in comparison to the certainty of death. Secondly, they became a driving force in securing research funding, ensuring cancer remained at the forefront of the national political agenda. By participating in grant review panels at the National Cancer Institute and the Department of Defense, they brought the patient perspective directly into the heart of scientific priority setting. Thirdly, and perhaps most crucially, they shattered the traditional culture of passive resignation within patient communities, fundamentally reshaping how the disease was articulated. People are no longer victims of cancer, but survivors of it. They demand to be equal partners in their treatment, entitled to understand their diagnosis, access their medical records, and participate in treatment decisions. The doctor-patient relationship has thus shifted from paternalistic management to collaborative partnership. Patients who once remained silent under the gaze of medicine have risen to make their voices heard, demanding to be listened to. They no longer merely await a cure, they fight for it. They pursue a different kind of cure. Traditional weapons, chemotherapy and radiotherapy, are notorious for indiscriminate slaughter. These poisons target rapidly dividing cells. Yet the problem lies in the fact that such cells are not confined to cancerous ones. Hair follicle cells, intestinal lining cells, and bone marrow cells divide rapidly too. The so-called therapies often destroy healthy tissues, whether the poison can eliminate cancer before killing the patient. This resembles a scorched earth policy, a biological carpet bombing. Patients and doctors alike yearned for a better solution, much like the magic bullet Paul Ehrlich envisioned nearly a century ago, a weapon that could precisely locate and destroy cancer cells, targeting only them while leaving healthy tissue untouched. For decades, this dream remained elusive. Yet as the 20th century drew to a close, deep within the code of life, this dream was about to dawn. This revolution began with a rare blood cancer, with an orange pill, ingeniously designed, astonishingly effective. The story's origins lie not in gleaming pharmaceutical laboratories, but in a humble hospital lab in 1962's Philadelphia. Researchers Peter Neal of the University of Pennsylvania and David Hungerford of the Fox Chase Cancer Center were poring over chromosomes from chronic myeloid leukemia (CML) patients under their microscopes. This peculiar affliction followed a relentless pattern. An initial abnormal proliferation of white blood cells inevitably progressed to fatal acute leukemia. As Noel and Hungerford meticulously arranged the patient's leukemia cell chromosomes into a karyotype, they observed an anomaly, an inexplicable shortening, consistently present on chromosome 22. They named this abnormal chromosome after its discovery site, the Philadelphia chromosome. This marked humanity's first identification of a specific genetic abnormality definitively linked to cancer. Though profoundly significant, this discovery remained an unsolved mystery for years. Like a clue or calling card left by a murderer, its significance remained unknown. What function did this tiny chromosomal defect serve? The answer emerged over a decade later with advances in genetic technology. In 1973, Janet Rowley, a researcher at the University of Chicago, discovered that the Philadelphia chromosome was not merely a missing DNA fragment. It was in fact a translocation mutation, a catastrophic genetic accident. Following a break in chromosome 9, a segment swapped places with chromosome 22, giving rise to a novel mutated genobus, a hybrid formed by the fusion of the AL gene from chromosome 9 with the BCR gene from chromosome 22. This newly created BCR fusion gene proved to be the crucial evidence. It spawned a rogue protein, the tyrosine kinase. In healthy cells, tyrosine kinases function like switches, directing when cells should grow and divide. They are tightly regulated. Switching on or off is required. But the BCR-ABL kinase had gone rogue, permanently stuck in the on position, continuously commanding cells to divide. This was the sole identifiable engine driving the cancer. For the first time, the enemy had a name and a function: BCR-ABL. This discovery fundamentally reshaped the conceptual framework. Chronic myeloid leukemia was no longer a mysterious blood disorder, but a condition triggered by a single hyperactive enzyme. Theoretically, designing a drug that precisely blocked this enzyme, fitting into its structure like a key into a lock and paralyzing its mechanism, could shut down the cancer engine and halt the progression of chronic myeloid leukemia. This became the obsession of Brian Duca, a young oncologist and researcher working at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in the early 1990s. Duca felt profoundly frustrated by the brutal inadequacy of CML treatments. The best option then was bone marrow transplantation, a high-risk procedure suitable for only a minority of patients. The alternative was chemotherapy, offering almost no hope. Ducasse remained convinced a better solution existed. He staked his career on the concept of targeted therapy, dedicating himself to developing drugs that could inhibit BCR-ABL. His quest led him to Sanofi-Aventis later, merged with other companies to form Novartis Pharmaceuticals. There, chemist Nicholas Litton was leading a team developing unscreening compounds that inhibit protein kinases. This research proved exceptionally challenging. Most believed it impossible to identify compounds that could specifically block a particular kinase without shutting down other vital kinases in the body, a scenario that would prove fatally toxic. Yet Leiden's team synthesized a series of compounds, among which one designated ST-I-571 demonstrated remarkable potential in test-tube experiments, appearing to be a potent, specific inhibitor of the BCR-ABL kinase. Upon learning of this compound, Duca immediately recognized its potential and collaborated with Leiden to test ST-I-571 on chronic myeloid leukemia cells in the laboratory. The results were astonishing. The drug not only inhibited cancer cell growth, but eradicated them entirely, without harming healthy cells. This was the miracle bullet everyone had longed for. Yet transforming a promising laboratory compound into a life-saving drug for human patients required crossing a vast and treacherous chasm. Pharmaceutical company SBA remained hesitant. Chronic myeloid leukemia was a rare disease. Was it worth investing hundreds of millions of dollars in drug development for such a niche market? Most within the company advocated shelving the project. The medical community was equally skeptical. The notion that a non-toxic pill could end a fatal leukemia seemed almost like a fairy tale. The entire field of oncology was built upon sticotoxis chemotherapy. This new concept represented a truly disruptive breakthrough. Duke Howard, Oregon Health Science University, became the drug's staunchest advocate. Through relentless lobbying and persuasion, he finally persuaded Novartis to reluctantly fund a small phase I clinical trial. Such trials typically only establish safe dosages rather than efficacy, with low expectations for clinical response. In June 1998, the first patients were enrolled. These individuals with advanced chronic myeloid leukemia had exhausted all other treatments and faced only months to live. In desperation, they began taking the small orange tablets, the drug now known as imatinib. A miracle ensued. Its efficacy was unprecedented in oncology history. Patients sent home to await death saw dangerously elevated white blood cell counts plummet to normal levels within weeks, while enlarged spleens began to shrink. Most astonishingly, when researchers examined the bone marrow, they found that the cells carrying the Philadelphia chromosome had vanished entirely. All this occurred with remarkably mild side effects: no hair loss, no nausea, no debilitating fatigue. patients returned to work, played with their children, and reclaimed their lives. This drug, later named Gleevec, was working, its efficacy far exceeding anyone's expectations, driven by a powerful alliance of researchers, clinicians, and newly empowered CML patient advocates. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted record-breaking approval for Gleevec in 2001. It transformed CML from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition, offering patients the prospect of near-normal lifespans controlled by a single daily pill. Yet Gleevec's significance extends far beyond CML, marking a paradigm shift in treatment. It empirically overturned conventional cancer therapy thinking. By truly understanding the molecular biology of specific cancers and identifying their unique genetic vulnerabilities, their fatal weaknesses, precision-targeted drugs could be designed to overcome them. Thus began the era of precision medicine. The war against the king of all diseases is no longer a crude battle of poison and radiotherapy. This conflict has evolved into a contest of wits and espion, a quest to locate the enemy's master control switch. With a single touch of a molecular tube-precise key, its energy source can be permanently severed. Yet despite modern laboratories crafting countless molecular scalpels and genetic keys within dust-free silence, this battle against the king of all diseases overlooks its most potent, ancient, and intimate potential ally. This force has patrolled the deepest corridors of the human body since the first vertebrates swam through primordial seas. It is a breathtakingly intricate security system, a standing army of trillions of tireless sentinels, the immune system. For most of the 20th century, from Harvard's Layton laboratories to clinical clinics, mainstream doctrine declared this army blind to cancer. Its logic was simple, almost elegant. The immune system specializes in distinguishing self from non-self. It assaults invading bacteria, foreign viruses, transplanted organs. Yet cancer, though its conduct is monstrous, originates from within. It is like a distorted reflection in a broken mirror, a citizen turned traitor. Thus it was believed the body's police could not perceive such a brazen, lurking enemy. Yet within the faint signals of this flawed theory, the whisper of heresy had long echoed. Long before DNA was discovered, a New York surgeon named William Coley noticed something peculiar in the late 19th century. This orthopedic specialist at Memorial Hospital witnessed countless patients. Many young heartbreak succumbed to brucellosis mora. Yet he was also a meticulous recorder. Within those case files, he discerned a pattern. He came across the case of a German immigrant named Stein, a patient with a neck sarcoma who seemed beyond hope. Yet after contracting a malignant streptococcal skin infection, commonly known as pneumococcal infection, the sarcoma miraculously vanished. It appeared the patient's body, in fighting off the bacterial invasion, had inadvertently eradicated the cancer. The discovery was astonishing. Coley began to ponder, what if the infection was no accident? What if the high fever, inflammation, and the body's fierce defensive response to bacteria unexpectedly delivered collateral damage to the tumor? He embarked on a series of experiments that would seem inconceivable today, beginning to systematically inject live streptococci into cancer patients. The results were both dramatic and alarming. Some patients succumbed to the infection itself, while others experienced miraculous remission. Tumors deemed incurable gradually dissolved. Recognizing the risk, he refined his approach, creating a sterile mixture of heat minus inactivated bacterial ether termed Coley's toxin. Over the next 4 decades, he treated hundreds with this peculiar, seemingly antiquated concoction, achieving success rates in certain cancers comparable to late 20th century therapies. Yet the medical establishment pursued a radically different path. The clean, controllable nature of radiotherapy, coupled with the impending wave of chemotherapy, proved far more appealing than Coley's chaotic and unpredictable biological alchemy. His research was dismissed as quackery, regarded as the anecdotal ramblings of an elderly surgeon. By the time of his death, in 1936, his pioneering vision had faded into obscurity, relegated to a footnote in the annals of progress. Yet the concept did not perish entirely, it merely entered a dormant state, awaiting the catch-up of scientific advancement. And that catch-up eventually arrived in the final decades of the 20th century. This revolution did not originate in cancer clinics, but emerged from the quiet, rigorous realm of basic immunology. In the mid-1990s, within a laboratory at the University of California, Berkeley, a rugged Texan blues harmonica player named James Allison was studying T cells, these elite forces of the immune system, akin to highly trained assassins, specialists in identifying and eliminating infected or abnormal cells. Allison never set out to cure cancer. As a pure scientist, he was driven solely by curiosity. He simply wished to understand how T cells decide when to launch an attack and, equally crucially, when to stand down. An army that kills indiscriminately is as dangerous as its enemy. The immune system is equipped with intricate accelerators and breaks these checkpoints, prevent it from spiraling into autoimmune disease. Allison became fixated on a specific protein on T- cell surfaces called CTLA-4. He discovered it acted like a powerful brake when T- cells were activated to combat threats. CTLA-4 rapidly appeared on their surfaces, binding to ligand proteins on other cells and abruptly halting the T- cells' attack. This was the crucial off- switch. Subsequently, Allison conceived a revolutionary idea that completely transformed his research direction. The conventional wisdom held that the immune system could not recognize cancer cells. Allison challenged this assumption. He pondered, what if the immune system could indeed recognize cancer cells? Could it identify the abnormalities in cancer cells, those mutated proteins, and dispatch T cells to attack? But what if cancer cells, through cunning evolution, had learned to exploit the body's own defense mechanisms? What if tumors were actively pressing the CTLA-4 brake, commanding incoming T cells to halt and ignore the threat? The issue lay not in recognition failure, but in execution failure. The immune response had been sabotaged. If this hypothesis held true, the treatment solution was breathtakingly simple. There was no need for crude stimulants like interleukin-2 to forcibly activate the immune system. Simply sever the brake line, block the CTLA-4 signaling pathway, release those killer T cells that have long lain dormant, poised for action, and let them fulfill their innate mission. He developed an antibody, like a miniature guided missile, capable of precisely targeting and disabling the CTLA-4 molecule. He named this strategy checkpoint blockade. In mouse trials, the results were astonishing. Not only did the previously lethal tumors slow their growth, they were even eradicated entirely. The mice were cured, but translating this therapy from animals to humans presented enormous challenges. The pharmaceutical industry was deeply skeptical. Failed cancer vaccines and immune-boosting drugs were a dime a dozen. Allison's vision seemed too radical, too simplistic. For years, he pitched his proposal to major companies, only to face repeated rejection. Ultimately, a small biotech firm named Medurex took the risk. Later acquired by the major pharmaceutical company Bristol-Myers Squibb, they developed a human-ized version of Allison's antibody, the drug eventually named ipilimumab. The first human trials, launched in the early 2000s, focused on patients with metastatic melanoma. This disease was effectively a death sentence, with chemotherapy offering little hope. When median survival was measured in months, initial trial results were perplexing. Some patients deteriorated critically as their immune systems ran amok. Attacking their own body, certain tumors appeared to grow under the onslaught of the infiltrating T- cells. Yet then came an unprecedented turning point. In approximately 20% of terminally ill patients, Tumors began shrinking until they vanished, never to return. This was not temporary remission, but enduring, long-term cure. Patients admitted to palliative care were found 5, even 10 years later, swinging golf clubs with no trace of disease. It was a miracle born of pure curiosity, driven science. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe at Kyoto University, in Japan, another quiet, meticulous scientist, Tetsuko Honjo, uncovered another brake mechanism in T cells. He named it PD-1 programmed death-1. Like Ellison, he was a basic immunologist rather than an oncologist. He meticulously mapped the functional landscape of this new checkpoint, equally recognizing its potential. Research revealed that numerous tumors from lung and bladder to renal cancers had learned to disguise themselves as PD-1 ligands by expressing PD-lone molecules. This was akin to hoisting a friendly flag to Team-cell patrols, declaring all is well here. I am one of you. The development of antibodies targeting PD-1 and PD-lone interactions sparked a new wave of drug innovation. Drugs such as nivolumab and pembrolizumab have demonstrated greater efficacy and lower toxicity than CTLA- for inhibitors in certain cancers. For diseases like non-small cell lung cancer, which for decades remained a ruthlessly rapid killer, genuine hope has suddenly emerged. Patients who had endured multiple failed chemotherapy regimens were achieving deep, durable remissions. The floodgates had opened. The era of immunotherapy had arrived. Following surgery, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy, the fourth pillar of cancer treatment was firmly established. This marked a fundamental shift in therapeutic strategy. For a century, the focus had been on seeking external weapons to poison cancer cells. Now the objective was to dismantle the defense mechanisms of cancer cells, unleashing the body's own, evolutionarily perfected internal army to wage the war against cancer that was rightfully theirs to fight. The 19th century forgotten surgeon William Coley has finally been vindicated by history. Yet, despite the jubilant celebrations within oncology circles, despite Ellison and Honjo's 2018 Nobel Prize, despite lives saved that would have been lost a decade prior, a sobering reality is emerging. Immunotherapy is not a panacea. This is a revolution, but only a partial one. For many patients, the miracle never materialized. Against cancers like pancreatic and shingles, immune checkpoint inhibitors have achieved almost nothing. Even in responsive cancers such as melanoma, the majority of patients still derive no benefit. In other cases, initial efficacy is often overtaken by devastating recurrence. Cancer cells invariably find new ways to hide, new points of breakthrough. It turns out the emperor has not been deposed. He merely suffered defeat in a single pivotal battle. His adaptability, strategic retreats, and cunning counterattacks remain intact and terrifying. This war is far from over. The hard -1 victories of immunotherapy, and indeed earlier targeted therapies, have instead revealed the enemy's true nature. We have been fighting a phantom all along. We once viewed cancer as a singular entity, believing a single magic bullet could breach this impregnable fortress. The reason cancer therapy worked was that it targeted a single key driver mutation in chronic myeloid leukemia. But most cancers, especially common solid tumors like lung, colon, breast, and prostate cancer, are not like that. Observing a single tumor under the microscope is like gazing upon a chaotic metropolis of cellular diversity. This concept of tumor heterogeneity lies at the heart of cancers intricately. Tumors are not clones but populations of cells. Within this ecosystem, millions of cells, all descended from a single malignant progenitor, continue to mutate and evolve. Some proliferate rapidly. Others excel at recruiting blood vessels. Some master the art of camouflage to evade the immune system, while others gain drug resistance purely through random mutations. No matter what poison we administer, When patients undergo chemotherapy, it exerts intense selective pressure. The drugs sweep through the body like venom, annihilating billions of cancer cells. Tumors shrink, imaging results appear favorable. Oncologists declare partial or even complete remission. Yet this is merely a statistical illusion. As long as a tiny fraction of cells within the original tumor carry specific mutations that enable their survival during the chemical assault, they emerge as the battlefield survivors. Unchallenged, these drug-resistant cells begin to proliferate, and the tumor array grows. Yet this new tumor, this recurrent cancer, is an entirely different organism. It is a veteran, hardened by the first battle, composed entirely of cells immune to the drugs just administered. The once highly effective chemotherapy is now useless. This is Darwinian evolution. Survival of the fittest unfolds at breakneck speed on the human battlefield. Essentially, we are cultivating cancer cells more cunning and resilient than the original malignancy. Targeted therapies and immunotherapies similarly play out this tragedy. When a tumor relies on a specific signaling pathway, we cleverly block it with drugs. Yet within the chaotic cell population, some cells inevitably stumble upon shortcuts to bypass the roadblock, activating new pathways to continue nourishing themselves. They survive, proliferate, and the cancer returns. A tumor's surface may be marked by specific mutated proteins, making it recognizable to the immune system. We unleash T-minus cells, which destroy all visible cells. Yet if subclonal cells no longer express that protein, they become invisible. These cells survive, and when the disease recurs, they evade the body's defenses entirely. Cancer is not one enemy, but a million potential adversaries. This mercurial legion can alter tactics in an instant. More troublesome still is the tumor's growth environment itself. Tumors do not grow in a vacuum, but take root within the body's complex living tissues. They corrode neighboring cells, constructing a pathological ecosystem around themselves, known as the tumor microenvironment. It secretes chemical signals to deceive the body into generating new blood vessels to nourish itself, a process called angiogenesis. It recruits specific immune cells, not to attack but to protect, forming a treacherous guard of renegade agents. It constructs a physical scaffold of inflammatory tissue around itself, erecting fortress walls impervious to drugs and T-cells. Combating tumors is not akin to removing stones from a field. It is more akin to attempting to clear a rotten swamp from deeply entrenched poison ivy, where even the soil and water sources have been co-opted by the invader to fuel its growth. Yet the most terrifying ultimate challenge, and the culprit behind over 90% of cancer deaths, is metastasis. The primary tumor B is a lump in the breast or shadow on the lung. Rarely proves fatal. What truly claims lives is the cancer cell's ability to migrate. Metastasis is a logistical masterpiece worthy of an emperor's campaign. At some stage of tumor development, a handful of the most aggressive and resilient cells gain the capacity to detach from the main mass. They must learn to survive within the blood or lymphatic system's hostile environment that would tear apart most cells. They must evade the immune system's patrols. Then, they must find distant new territories to settle in unestablished colonies. As the British surgeon Stephen P. Uddock astutely observed in 1889, this is no random process. He proposed the seed and soil hypothesis. Cancer cells are seeds that can only grow in suitable organ soil. This explains why breast cancer often metastasizes to bones. Colon cancer favors the liver, and lung cancer spreads to the brain. Once these metastatic colonies are established, the nature of the war changes completely. It ceases to be a localized, single-point engagement and becomes a guerrilla war across the entire human mapping, folding simultaneously on dozens of fronts. The primary tumor may be excised surgically, but how does one eradicate microscopic cellular nests in the liver, lungs, bones, and brain? Localized radiotherapy can eliminate single foci, but cannot cover the entire body. Systemic chemotherapy remains the sole option, yet as previously noted, drug resistance is almost inevitable. The sheer scale of the problem inevitably forms an insurmountable barrier. The Emperor's strategy is one of distributed, redundant, adaptive warfare, willingly sacrificing billions of cellular soldiers to chemotherapy, knowing full well that a handful of drug-resistant commanders will survive and rebuild their forces. It dispatches thousands of colonists on expeditions, certain that as long as a few find fertile ground, the empire will expand. This is a ruthless, decentralized, and profoundly intelligent adversary. We face not a solitary monarch within a castle, but a vast, clandestine rebellion that has long permeated every corner of the kingdom. Despite medical advances, we have yet to discover a reliable method to completely pacify this territory. Confronted by such a cunning and tenacious foe, one that exploits the laws of evolution to ensure its own survival, traditional strategies have clearly proven inadequate. Whether the indiscriminate approach of chemotherapy, poisoning the entire system, or the precision of single-target drugs, both resemble clearing a diverse, expansive garden with a single herbicide. You might eliminate dandelions, yet allow thistles and foxtail grass to proliferate unchecked. To combat such a complex and personalist adversary, our countermeasures must be equally complex and equally personalist. We must become more astute, learning to anticipate the enemy's next move, neutralizing threats before they manifest, and tailoring weapons to each cancer's unique vulnerabilities. This represents the true frontier of the battlefield and the future direction of the fight against cancer. The primary strategic shift lies in intelligence gathering. Historically, the war against cancer has often commenced only after the enemy has fortified its strongholds. By the time we detect cancer, it has grown into a mass visible on X-rays, becoming the source of unexplained pain. At this stage, the tumor has already formed a mature, heterogeneous ecosystem and may even have scattered metastatic seeds far and wide. Humanity has long dreamt of eradicating cancer in its infancy. At stage I or even stage 0, when it is merely a localized cluster of abnormal cells, the key to realizing this dream lies in liquid biopsy technology. Tumors, even minuscule ones, are inherently chaotic, constantly releasing fragments into the bloodstream. Dead cells, mutated DNA fragments, and microvesicles carrying molecular information. For decades, these cellular debris were dismissed as useless noise. Yet with gene sequencing technology achieving astonishing sensitivity, we can now find these needles in the haystack. A simple blood sample taken during routine check-ups and detect minute traces of circulating tumor DNA. This not only informs clinicians of cancer's presence, but precisely identifies the tumor type and driving mutations long before CT scans can visualize lesions. This shifts the entire diagnostic paradigm from late-stage detection to proactive, continuous monitoring. The effect is akin to deploying a microscopic spy network, monitoring the health of every cellular citizen in real time and sounding the alarm at the first sign of mutiny. When we can identify the enemy earlier and more clearly, the core challenge becomes how to disarm it more precisely. The future points towards a powerful, almost science-fiction, like to C or ISPR, originally discovered as a peculiar feature of bacterial immune systems. The CRISPR or Cas system is essentially a programmable pair of molecular scissors capable of precisely locating and cutting specific DNA sequences. This technology grants humanity the unprecedented ability to directly edit the source code of life, with profound implications for cancer treatment. We understand cancer as a disease triggered by genetic mutations. What if, instead of eliminating cells bearing mutated genes, we could repair the genes themselves? For hereditary cancer syndromes like BRCA mutations, We might correct errors in susceptible cells before tumors form. For established cancers, CRISPR could be used in laboratories to modify a patient's own T-minus cells, transforming them into more potent anti-minus cancer warriors. We could engineer these cells to ignore tumor suppression signals or equip them with new receptors to recognize unique proteins on cancer cell surfaces. These enhanced super soldier T cells, known as CA or -E therapy, once reintroduced into the patient, become bespoke, self-replicating living drugs that precisely hunt down and destroy specific cancer cells. Early breakthroughs in blood cancers have been nothing short of miraculous, and the race to apply this to solid tumors is now well underway. CRISPR, our technology, realizes the ultimate form of personalist medicine, not merely matching precise drugs to specific patients, but rewriting the patient's own biological mechanisms to defeat the disease from within. Finally, to manage the vast new information streams from liquid biopsies, whole-to-mer genome sequencing, and the complex behavior of the immune system, we require more powerful forms of intelligence. While the human brain is exquisitely designed, it cannot process the sheer volume of data generated by a single modern cancer patient. This is precisely where artificial intelligence comes into its own. AI algorithms can be trained on vast databases comprising millions of pathological slides, learning to identify cellular patterns predictive of metastasis with speed and accuracy surpassing even the most experienced human pathologists. Machine learning can decipher a tumor's complete genomic and proteomic map, cross-referencing it with drug response databases to predict the most effective treatment combinations for specific patients, and even anticipate potential evolutionary escape routes for tumors. I can design novel drugs, optimize radiotherapy regimens, and tailor personalized treatment plans, initiatives that transcend standardized protocols, heralding an era of non-clinical trials, each patient's treatment becoming a bespoke experiment for their unique condition. Future oncologists will not be replaced by machines but empowered by them, when human specialists wield analytical tools rivaling the complexity of the emperor himself. This vision compels us to reconsider our ultimate goal. The metaphor of the war on cancer has always implied ultimate unconditional surrender, victory signifying eradication. Yet for many cancers, this may never have been the apt metaphor. The future may not be total victory, but a negotiated permanent truce. The goal may not always be cure, but control. Using these advanced monitoring tools, precision editing technologies, and artificial intelligence, cancer could be transformed from a fatal acute crisis into a manageable chronic condition. In such a future, liquid biopsies could nip the threat of recurrence in the bud. A single round of precision-targeted therapy could return cancer to remission, allowing life to continue as normal. In this future, the emperor is not slain, but deposed, disarmed, and confined for life within a comfortable prison within the body. In this future, humanity, armed with profound understanding of its ancient adversary, will ultimately learn to coexist with its imperfect biological mechanism, transforming the battle for extinction into enduring peace. The war is not yet over, but, in the long, bloody history of our struggle against disease, the path to peace finally begins to dawn.